we are going to ask these 3 questions about your family's bedtime routine. And go ahead and part of the idea of community conversations has been to take some things offline and to have some conversation face-to-face. We think that's really helpful. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing a few things with your table, who you are, where your kids are, maybe how you enforce bedtimes, anything like that. And if you have any tips for helping your children and teens get ready to fall asleep. And then we'll get started here right after the hour to let anyone else come in.
Welcome. Hello, can you hear me okay? Everyone hear me okay? Great. Thank you so much for coming this evening to our community conversation. We are just a privilege to have all of you join us for this important topic and to join in a dialogue that's very important to us. And so I'd like to welcome you and then go through some of the context for this evening. So you were able to share with a neighbor, hopefully at your table, a little bit about what your bedtime or your evening routines look like. One of the purposes behind having community conversations here at Mason City Schools is to continue to encourage meaningful relationships to be built with our community and to strengthen and diversify your network. And to do that in person, in real time. There's a lot of great formats out there like Facebook and Twitter, and they're all great social media platforms. But this idea of meeting face-to-face is almost a lost art from time to time. And we value that here at Mason City Schools, bringing people together into the same space to share ideas and to work with one another to solve problems. And so one of our purposes of having community conversations is to build community. So that's why we're excited to see all of your faces and have you join us tonight. One of the things that we've done is I like to always give a personal note. And the first slide up here is the Cooper family. And just to share a quick personal note. So you shared a little bit with your table about what you do in the evenings and some of the successful routines you've established with your family. And so I like to share those as well. If we're going to ask you to do something and be transparent, it's good for us to also be transparent and vulnerable as well. So one of the things that the Cooper family does, and we try to do, is we have 4 kiddos. And our 4 kiddos are in different buildings. We have a 7th grader, 5th grader, 2nd grader, and 1st grader. And one of the things that we've tried to establish in our home is that policy of no screen time for the last 30 minutes or so, sometimes last hour of their day, so that they are unwinding without interacting with a screen. And I know that's hard at times because of homework and some of the demands that we have, but we've also made a commitment not to have screens in their bedrooms. And that's something that's really important to us as a family. We've read a lot of research on that, and it's something that we've established. Now you're saying, well, Jonathan, you don't have a high schooler. I don't, so that's fair. I don't have a high schooler, so I don't know that struggle yet. But it is something that we've established at this age because it is important, and we'll cross each year as it comes. And a lot of that depends a lot on the maturity and the readiness of your own students. So I don't want to say just because the Coopers do this, this applies to everybody. We know that that's not how the world works. Just sharing, this is a routine that we've established because it's important to us. And hopefully you've also established some routines in your home, whether it's time to read or time for your kids to just unplug for a little bit and talk to you about what's going on in the day. And I would encourage you to continue to lean into those conversations and ask them to share with you, and anything's fair game in our home to talk about any of those things, to keep that conversation open. So that's the Coopers. As I go on in our agenda here, we have a little bit of the process that leads us up to today, and then we're going to get to our students. So I'm giving them a little time to think through what we're going to be talking about here in just a little bit. The process that led us to this community conversation specifically had all kinds of layers to it. It started about 1.5 to 2 years ago when we started looking at the research behind school start times. And what did the research say was good for our students, and specifically, I should say, adolescents, so grades 7 through 12. And as we started to look at that research, it was a compelling conversation for us to look into deeper. And as we went around to our community conversations, we heard that coming back to us and people asking us, what are you doing as a system? What are you doing as an organization to address this concept of start time for adolescents? Since our kids start at 7:15 in the morning. And so we looked at that and we studied that, and that was one of the pieces that brought this to our attention. And that fell into a larger context. And the context of mental health was the context that brought us to. And we started to look at mental health seriously in our district because we started to see patterns that were concerning to us as administrators, concerning to our parents, and concerning mostly to our students. And our students were calling us in and saying, we need to do something about the levels of anxiety and depression that are happening specifically at our high school and even into our middle school. and I would argue even into some of our younger grades as we look at that. And we're in a new world now, and we're looking at new things and new challenges. And so mental health is the focus that I do not want us to lose tonight. So as we look at start times, it's one piece, one step. And be very careful, it's not a solution, it's a step. It takes many, many of those steps, and it takes a whole community to begin to build solutions. So I just want to make sure that we're really clear about that. We're not suggesting that tonight's conversation is going to have a solution to all of our mental health concerns, but we are going to talk about a specific step we're taking. We also listened very closely to community conversations by going out into homes. Over 50 or so community conversations. Some of the homes, I can see some of the faces here that have been hosts, and I thank you for hosting us and allowing us to come into your homes. And we've brought in not only the school, but also our city partners. And Mason City and the township have been excellent about coming alongside and going into homes and listening to some of the concerns from our public and from our parents. The other piece that we did was we read a lot of the research behind what is best for adolescents and trying to find the right time for start times. And then we engaged in focus groups. And we went around and we talked to focus groups around the community. And those focus groups were anywhere from a sports or an athletic families to a group of band parents to a group of parents that have students that are identified gifted. Went to lots of different groups and listened to what they thought about our current start times. And so that brought us up to today. And I'll review really quickly a couple of our goals for tonight. And then we'll get to our stars up here. So a couple of things I want us to consider and keep in mind as we go forward tonight in our conversation. Number one, we want to engage our community honestly and transparently about conversations about our student wellness. Number two, we want to strengthen and diversify our network by building new and meaningful relationships, hopefully tonight even at your table. Number three, we want to share two viable options that we have considered and put together for your feedback tonight, and we will open up feedback for 2 weeks moving forward to hear your thoughts on our solution. Number four, the conditions and commitment to each other tonight. I want us to assume positive intent when we're sharing things at our tables. I want us to be open to new ideas and open to solutions. I want us to share creative solutions and understand that tonight is a step. It's not the full solution. So be patient as we move forward if it's not the step that you wanted us to take, because we're still open to your feedback. And I want us to keep the why at the center of everything we talk about tonight, and that's our students and their mental health as we talk about this. So let's keep that as our focus tonight. Again, thank you for being here. Now moving on to our guest. We have these wonderful students here, and they're going to share a little bit about their story. So I'm going to start, and if you could get the microphone, see if you can get it out of there. It's a kind of a wrestling match, but you can probably, just take it apart too. That was it. I'm sorry. You're stronger than I thought. So that will come out, and what I would like us to do is go right along here, and if you could all share a little bit about who you are, what grade you're in, and maybe just something interesting about your experience here at Mason High School.
My name is Shreya Panmetsa. I'm a junior at Mason High School, and something interesting about my experience here. I'm not particularly sure what to share, but I've enjoyed going to school here for the past 3 years.
My name is Kevin Tang. I'm a junior as well, and one interesting thing is that I really like to get involved, and I'm the junior class president.
My name is Ryan Griffith. I'm a sophomore at Mason High School, and something that I've really enjoyed at the school is just how much the faculty has been involved with the students throughout the school.
My name is Tessa Joseph. I'm a 7th grader at Mason Middle School, and I'm here tonight to help all of you come another step in order to help our students with their sleep and their mental health. And especially at our young age, I think it's very important that we're getting our sleep and away from anxiety in order to properly develop and go on with our future lives.
Hi, I'm Braden Fetters, and I'm an 8th grader at Mason Middle School. And I think it's really cool how Mason has a really good system of you being able to do any path that you want to do.
Thank you so much for your introduction. Let's give them a hand just for being here this evening. So here's what I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about. First of all, I see that you have shirts on that say Hope Squad. If you don't mind giving us just a quick summary of what is Hope Squad so that our audience can hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Cooper, for bringing us out here to be able to talk about mental health tonight. And so what Hope Squad is we're students that really focus on peer-to-peer suicide prevention and mental health awareness.
Great. And Hope Squad is this something that's just happening here, or do you know if it's happening in other parts of the country?
It's definitely happening around other parts of the country. It started out in Utah, and it's spread out all throughout the country.
Great. How many different students are a part of this? Do you know how large Hope Squad is at this point?
We have just about over 60 students here at Mason's Hope Squad.
And then last question I have about Hope Squad is to tell everyone, if you don't mind, how do you get into Hope Squad? Is it something you apply for, you earn a certain GPA? How do you get into it?
So how students got into Hope Squad is we have a nomination process. So students, they fill out a form saying who are students you're most comfortable talking to, and they take those students and they form the Hope Squad.
Very good. So, and I appreciate your humble answer. What's happened here is we've asked our students to select people that are trustworthy, that they look at as people they can go to. Amazing students that they can go to and trust with their concerns, with their deepest, just things that are going on that are really bothering them. And there's 60 people that were selected from their peers. And then they were put on a list and then considered and then brought into Hope Squad and asked, would you consider serving in this capacity? And Hope Squad is something, and if you just go back 20 years, if I told you that you would be sitting here listening to fabulous students talk about a program that is designed to help students identify signs of suicide, to be proactive to address suicide. 20 years ago, people might have looked at me and said, that just doesn't sound right. That sounds like there's a concern. Yes, there is, and that's why we want to bring people together to talk about it. We have a big concern, and it's not just here at Mason High School. This is happening across the country with our youth. And so as an organization and as a school district, Mason City Schools is very serious about that. And that's why we looked for a program like Hope Squad to bring, because our students are already talking about this. And we wanted to equip them and give them the tools that they needed and the training and support that they could talk about this and then get help for students as soon as possible. So thank you so much, not only for being here tonight, but being a part of Hope Squad, because I understand the seriousness of that, and so we appreciate that. All right, our next question for the whole panel is, I have heard in some of our parents, and I just made the case, that there is a growing culture of anxiety and depression among youth today. Can you talk to me about some of the factors that you've seen that contribute to that growing culture?
Some of the factors that I've seen so far were, so basically, Mason's a very big school, and with that, you have many students who excel academically. And what I've noticed is that Mason as a school district is very competitive in almost every aspect, from sports to academics. And lots of times that puts a lot of pressure on students, and students put a lot of pressure on themselves. They also get pressure put on from their friends as well as their parents sometimes too. And I think the competitive nature is just a big factor in why students are stressed, because they're worrying about, what if I'm not good enough?
Thank you for sharing, and you can pass it along and others can share theirs.
Going off of what Kevin just said, from what I've seen, when you throw 4,000 kids into the biggest public high school in Ohio, it is really hard for kids to find like their place in something, because it feels like as a student, no matter what you do, no matter what you're good at, there's always someone that's 10 times better. And everyone obviously wants to excel at something, and you find people spreading themselves too thin when they keep trying different activities and trying to play an instrument, trying to do every club possible. For me, my freshman year, I remember within like the first 3-4 months of school, I like joined student government, speech and debate, mock trial, science fair. I was working at Wendy's from 5 to 7. Terrible choice on my part. But what I quickly found is that I could not manage it, and this was me as a freshman when I didn't even have that much schoolwork. So I would come home at 7 and like pass out, and then wake up at like 2, and then realize that I had to do some work even as a freshman. And so it's really hard when you want to find what you're good at, but there's so many things and so many opportunities. It's overwhelming.
Based off of what both of them said, I completely agree. I have multiple friends that when they come in out of the bus and we talk at my locker usually, they look like they're about to pass out. I mean, we're about to go into school and learn new things, but I don't think that they're able to handle it. And what we're going through is a lot of pressure. There's so many people around us that could do better than us, are doing better than us, or doing worse. And we need to find our place and how we fit in. And I feel like a huge portion of that is our after-school activities, homework, our studies, our ability, and our mental health. I personally play 2 instruments. I do multiple after-school activities. I play 2 sports and all kinds of bustling items. And I find it hard to have time for my family or just to spend time doing what I like. Like, I love reading. I haven't been able to look at a page since school started, and that could be my fault in participating in too many activities, but it's pressure being a middle schooler, and that's from my perspective as a 7th grader. And these high schoolers, I'm sure they have way too much to handle themselves.
Yeah, even as a middle schooler, I feel like there's a lot of pressure to do things that even you may not want to do, but you feel like you're forced to do them just to like exceed the people around you and to be as successful as people around you. And another thing is, I feel like, yeah, like what she said, people don't really feel like they have as much time to do things that they actually want to do other than school, because they feel like, once again, they're forced to do things in school that they may not even want to do themselves.
Anyone else have anything else to add?
Yeah, so really going on on top of what they say is the anxiety and depression levels at our school have just been getting higher and higher. And so when I'll be talking to a student who has been having thoughts about not wanting to live anymore, something they'll say a lot is, I haven't been sleeping, I'm always tired, and I just feel like I'm not getting the right amount of sleep that I need to get.
First of all, I appreciate your honesty and transparency, because this is a deep conversation, and I know that you're speaking from a place of truth that you've actually experienced or heard or you're dealing with at this time. So as we look at sleep, as you mentioned, and we talk about start times tonight, what's the impact that a start time or even sleep could have on this larger conversation in your perspective?
Yeah, so I definitely do think starting later will definitely have a positive impact on students' mental health. There was a study done at the University of Rochester that just by starting school later, they've noticed the numbers of students with depression, anxiety, they dropped a lot. And it wasn't a full solution, but it, just as Mr. Cooper said, it was definitely just a step.
Thanks.
I think starting school later would be a really big step in the right direction, because what I've noticed in myself and many other students is that no matter when we finish our work or when we've completed all our responsibilities, we usually almost always sleep at the same time no matter what. So let's say, for example, I finish all of my homework by 10 o'clock. It's still really hard for me to actually fall asleep or even commit to going to sleep before 11:30. So I think extending the time at which we start school just gives students more flexibility and allows students to get more sleep, which I think would be a big quality of life improvement and really help with the mental health situation in Mason.
Some of you have probably heard that it's been published several places, but there's a biological setback in like an adolescent's clock after puberty, because for a teen who was able to sleep at like 9 o'clock after puberty, they're not able to sleep until 10 or 11. And I definitely see that, because even nights where I get super excited and I finish all my work at 9, I get into bed and I sit there and I roll around until 11 and I still haven't fallen asleep. It's extremely hard when you've gotten accustomed one way and as well as like biological factors. And I think, like Kevin said, no matter what time I stay after school, how early I come home, whatever it happens, I always end up going to bed around the same 10, 11, 12. And so starting school times even a little bit later is a step in the right direction.
I agree. Even if I finish my homework early, I'll still be tossing around thinking of the next day or what to do next. And I feel like pushing the time up, just that number would motivate students to come to school, and that they're not just being there for no apparent reason and that there's a reason. Education is important, and that their sleep, they will get their sleep, and that just that number, like instead of 7:30, 8 o'clock, that number would motivate them that school is important and that they should be there and they're there for a reason. And because of this number, they're going to be able to properly pursue their future, their dreams, their career, be able to live a happy life just because with one minor step, the whole system's going to upgrade.
Yeah, I definitely believe that the school start time should be later. Not only for me, but for definitely other people in the middle school. When they wake up, they do not feel motivated to go to school. When I go to first and second bell, everyone just seems like not like themselves compared to how they are in seventh bell. And I'm sure teachers and administrators can say the same. By the time third bell comes, a flip in everyone's brain sort of switch, and they feel a lot more engaged in the atmosphere in the classroom, and people feel like they can learn more. And that's definitely better for not only academics, but just for your own mental health to be more engaged in the classroom.
So one last question I want you to think about is we have a room full of parents and community members, and if you were to give them advice on how to support the mental health conversation and some of the efforts, any advice, or even just connecting with their own kids, we would love to hear your advice. So think about that for just a second. One of the reasons we have our adolescents up here, the 7 through 12, is because that's where the research landed. And so we felt it was important for you to hear some of the conversations that we have been hearing from our own students and then also some of our parents. So this is a group of students that represent Hope Squad and middle school, just to hear their perspective. And so that's why, the why behind they're up here. So advice that you have for our parents.
So yeah, I know a lot of you parents, you wake up with your kids in the morning, early in the morning, you go off to school, and for some of you it might be a little early. There's probably not a lot of conversation going on in between breakfast. And so just starting school or later, just the beneficial of being more awake, more conversation between you and your child. Also, just another way of getting more bonding with your child is just to be more talking to them. I know a lot of children nowadays, they all have smartphones. I might not be seeing them that often. They might be out with friends. My sister recently went off to college, so now that it's just my parents and I, we've definitely had a lot more bonding, just gotten a lot closer.
So for the parents, something I've noticed is that with the whole mental health and depression situation here at Mason, I think a big root of it is comparison. So you have academic comparison, you have athletic comparison, and you have social comparison from the students as well as their peers and sometimes parents as well. So a piece of advice I would say is to try and limit the amount of comparison that you have in the home. So maybe not to compare your child's performance with someone else's, or maybe not to compare siblings with each other. And I think that's a huge step in the right direction because your child has their own best, and if anything, you should only encourage your child to do their own best and not compare it to the best of somebody else.
I think what they've said is all great. And to add on to that, I just think that we need to prioritize mental health as much as we prioritize physical health, because the fact of the matter is a lot of kids have problems that they don't feel comfortable talking about. And for us, when we talk to kids who maybe have been going through depression or they suffer from generalized anxiety disorder, before they've gone through a diagnosis or something like that, when we ask why they haven't reached out to someone or why they haven't talked to a counselor or something, they talk about how they're scared that their parents are going to find out and how they don't want their parents to know and that they're not, like, going to get mad at them. I think we need to make it clear to kids that their parents should be a resource for them as like people that they can talk to rather than be afraid of that, oh, I don't want to be a burden on them, because that's what I hear from most students. And it's really hard when you think that you can't share things with your parents, because for one of my friends, when she was having suicidal thoughts, and they were very serious because she was just like, voices in my room are, telling me things, and it was like a serious concern, and we went to administrators and all of that, but she would just lie her way out of it. And her excuse was just like, when she talked to me, she was like, no, don't ever talk to anybody again, because administrators, like, they're going to tell my parents are going to compare me to my sister, and it's just a cycle. And if kids were more able to talk to their parents, I think it would make a world of a difference.
I completely agree. I mean, no matter friend or foe, your family's always going to be there for you, or at least they should be. And I think building strong relationships always makes a difference. And that I'm not saying parents should be checking on them every 5 seconds or so. I'm saying they need a relationship where parents trust the children and children trust parents, and they understand each other's limits and how not to pressure each other or put each other in too much work, or make sure that the relationship is strong, connected, it's growing, and that that trust lasts, and that they're always there for each other.
Yes, I think that a big thing is time management. Like, you need to spend time with your family and do things that you want to do. You should not be doing things, like, yes, you're going to have homework. I know people who get home, they push off their homework, and they do it later in the day, and they do it at like midnight, and they wake up in the morning all stressed about it. And then they go through their day extremely tired, and it's just a repeating cycle of them putting things off. And then not only are they putting their homework off, oftentimes they're putting off times with their friends and their family, which I think are very important things, when I'm sure everyone else here agrees with that.
Thank you again for your time tonight, for your honesty, for your feedback. Let's give them a hand just for being a great, great panel.
I'm going to let our students leave this seat of honor if they want. They really did do an amazing job. Let's go ahead and give them another round of applause, and they can leave from being center stage there for a minute. They said so eloquently what the research says, and they actually quoted the research, so we don't need to spend a ton of time on that. But I think it is important to see kind of what is some grounded research in this. And really it does show children ages 6 to 10 should get between 9 and 11 hours of sleep. Adolescents should get between 8.5 and 9.25 hours of sleep per night. And we know from our own surveys, our kids are getting nowhere near that. I would say probably as adults, we're pretty sleep deprived too, and we'd all benefit from more sleep as well. But what we know is that those factors, and they talked about this, it's not I'm being unruly or I'm just being lazy. It's really my circadian rhythm, and so that's a part of it. Other things that, school start times are a piece, but certainly their extracurricular activities make an impact, in employment as well. Most school-age children get less than the recommended amount of sleep on weeknights. Parents report that children ages 6 to 11 only get 8.8 hours of sleep, and only 25% of high school students report getting 8 or more hours of sleep per night. So if you're a high school parent or a middle school parent and you were reading, oh, they're supposed to be getting 8 to 9.25 hours, we're nowhere near that, it's okay, you're not alone. Most of our students are nowhere near that, and it's not that we're bad parents, it's that we're trying hard to do all the amazing things that they're doing, and you've raised really terrific children. So we've been wrestling with this now for a while, and sitting there thinking, what is one step? One step, we're not going to solve all this, but what's one step that we could take? And we know that studies have found that when schools start at least 25 minutes later, students do actually tend to use that time to get more sleep, and that students sleep 25 to 77 minutes more per week per weeknight, when delaying start times by 25 to 60 minutes. So we're going to look at just one small step that we can take. And I'm going to turn that back over to Mr. Cooper.
All right. So you've heard a lot of the conversation. You've heard that if we could take some small steps, we would do that. So we want to start by just saying 30 minutes. So if we took 30 minutes and we moved our start time back, 30 minutes for our kids, what would that look like if you start to do the numbers? The research says at 25 minutes, we start to see an impact, a positive impact. We're a large system, so we have roughly almost 11,000 students. And when you start to think about the logistics of moving 11,000 students in and out of buildings, from homes to buildings to activities after school, and we take 30 minutes, it starts to have a huge impact on the rest of our environment and our schedule. So if we took that and we said, okay, 30 minutes over a week is 150 minutes of quality time, 600 minutes over a month, and 5,400 minutes over a school year, or 90 hours, somewhere around that we start to look at. So the impact seems small at the beginning and begins to add up over time. One of the pieces here when we look at 30 minutes that I want you to consider is how this starts to ripple through everything we do. And I'll go into some of those ideas here in just a second. We have 2 plans for you to consider. There is one plan that we'll call option 1. Option 1 is a consideration. I'll hit pause here for just a second. How does this fit into this conversation you just heard? I want to continue to reorient our thoughts. This is one piece of this larger conversation you just heard our students talk about with mental health. And as a school system, as an organization, we have heard and listened, and we've spent hours and hours trying to figure out how we can make a tweak in the system without having mass disruption across the whole entire system. How do we make a commitment as an organization? I'll give you an example of another quick commitment. Our Wi-Fi, for example, blocks social media for our students on their phones. They come into this building and they can get to the things that they need to on their Chromebooks and so on and so forth, but not to social media. But wait, they can get to social media. How do they do that? On your data. Why do I share that with you? The system can do steps in a direction, but this takes a partnership with you. And that's why I'm sharing this with you. It takes a partnership. We can't do it alone. So when I say 30 minutes, you might be thinking, well, geez, Jonathan, it's a big deal. It's a big deal when it ripples through a whole entire system. So as I show you these 2 options, understand these options took hours of logistics behind the scenes to get to these options. And we're doing our best to give you 2 options to give us feedback on. And so option 1, as we look at this, is we could move our 7 through 12. The current time is a 7:15 start time, and I stood out there on lot 3 this morning in the dark, greeting our students with a flashlight, saying good morning to them. I think I even saw this young man running. I said, be careful, it's a little slick. But it's dark, and a half an hour later does add some light to that. This is a 30-minute move back. As we talked to our focus groups, and we talked about, hey, could we start school at 8:30? It starts to ripple so many things on after-school curricular activity, all kinds of activities that start to show up, that it ripples beyond just Mason City Schools, but into all of the other schools that we interact with after school. So the other districts. So we said, okay, so let's step back and let's look at what could we do with 30 minutes? Could we start there? Could we make a commitment to that? What that does for Mason Elementary, and I'm going to use the term Mason Elementary so that we all know the location I'm talking about so it's not confusing. It's not Mason Intermediate. It's not Mason Intermediate where the middle school is or half the middle school is or that. For today's purpose, I'm going to use one term so that we can orient ourselves to where that is. Grades 3 through 6, Mason Elementary across the street, just so we can have a common language for tonight and for this conversation. So Mason Elementary 3 through 6, you can see where the current times are. Option 1 would start all of our students at the same time in that building and end at the same time in that building. In a little bit, we're going to ask for parent feedback on that, and we're going to have our elementary, anyone that's interested in the elementary conversation to move to this side of the room and give us some thoughts and feedback, and secondary to come over here and talk about some more of the factors that contribute to mental health concerns that we're having. So when we look at the 8:55 start time and the 3:25, things that you want to know, that is a consideration. When we look at that, we're bringing all of our students at one time, and I'll talk about some of the financial impact to that in just a minute. The Mason Early Childhood Center, we're looking at, it's not a direct 30 minutes back, it's about 25 minutes that it pushes that time back. Keep in mind, some of the factors that you need to know is that elementary, preschool through 6th grade has a 6.5-hour instructional day compared to our 7 through 12 with a 7-hour instructional day. So as you're looking at moving things around on the Tetris board, you're not looking at even pieces. These pieces are a little different in terms of the time frame that we have. And I'll bring these back up. So when I flip from this, I'll bring it back up together. Option 2 is when we have 2 start times at Mason Elementary, where we would still have our 7 through 12 starting 30 minutes back, and we would have our 5-6 building, and it would be 2 buildings. I do want to say that clearly. Either plan, one thing we've heard is that Jonathan, District, Mason, could you make, and you heard them talk about it, make large schools feel smaller? So one thing that we have decided and made a commitment with our board and with our administrators to do is to have 2 separate buildings under one roof. We still have the benefits and the resources to leverage of a large building, but you have the feel of a building that's 2 grade levels. And our parents have asked us for these kind of efforts to make this move, and so this is one of our steps in that direction in making a 5-6 building and a 3-4 building. And that's important in a few different ways, so it makes it feel like a smaller building in there. So option 2, 2 start times. You have your 8:55 start time and your 9:10 start time. Where we came up with these start times, if you're wondering, well, why can't you just move this and tweak this? We have roughly, we deal with about 80 to 90 buses on the road at one time, and I'm giving general terms. One thing that's not shown up here is all of our private school students. So we bus maybe around 500 private school students throughout our communities. And that's what we do as a public school. That's a requirement of public schools. If you offer busing, you offer busing to not just your students in the public school, but to those in the private school as well. You offer transportation. So that doesn't show up here, but that's another layer of complexity that that we had to think through, because we have to get our students that are going to private schools to their schools as well. And so that's as many buses as we have. And we need about 35 minutes or so for us to complete a bus route. For example, so when they leave Mason Intermediate and they're going and dropping kids off at their homes and they're making it back to the next location for pickup, we need to give them that time frame for buses to make it back safely and make it back on time. So there's a lot of factors that we're working through when we're considering these pieces. And we're trying to keep this in the parameters where it's not astronomical in cost. Because if someone said to me, Jonathan, what if we just had 1 start time? Let's just go for that 8:30 start time. That may be, and I don't know if my calculations are correct, but it could be about $10 million. Sure, we could do that. Our treasurer's right over here. Is that about right? But that would be a levy just for start time in itself. I mean, it would be a big deal. And then we could also look at 2 start times and cut that to $5 million. So you can see the numbers start at one time. We can use anywhere between 63 buses and 70 buses at one time to run that route. When we run 2 separate routes, we're running 2 different groups of 40 buses at a time. So you can see where there's some cost savings that start to come up there. And half of our bus drivers are full-time with benefits and half are part-time. So we can do the logistics of figuring that out. Operations versus capital. Just a really quick, and my treasurer will correct me if I'm wrong, but a really quick, operation cost on this side is a different bucket of money than capital. You can't spend it on the same things. For example, capital cost can be spent on roofs, pavement, and structures. Operation cost in school funding can be spent on classrooms, teachers, those kind of personnel kind of pieces. It's an important thing for you to recognize when you're looking at these two options, because option one, there is a savings of $150,000 a year on an annual basis here and forward every year. So that's a cost that continues to, a savings that we continue to grow that we can place into different spaces. One piece of feedback that came to me live today from one of our teachers when we were sharing this is, so you're saying one idea could be you could use some of that to invest back in personnel for mental health? We could. Sure. That's the kind of creativity and feedback we're looking for over this next 2 weeks. There is a capital cost involved, though. If we go with this option, there's a $300,000 to $500,000 one-time upfront cost. And that's to make sure that our pathways, and I'll show you in just a second, are ready for the drop-off and pickup, because we want to solve some of our traffic concerns at the same time so that we're not all overwhelming Mason-Montgomery Road and we're being respectful to the rest of the city. And so we have to beef up some of our pathways around the school and some of our parking and parking lots. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. On option two, there's a zero cost to the district compared to this current year. If we would compare it to the year before this year, there would be some additional cost because there's more cost this year because of having people in different locations like we do than there was the year before, because we're transporting a little differently. And just so we know that, but there's zero cost compared to this year. So those are just some financial pieces to consider. And there's some other details, but I want to give you the big picture pieces. As we look at logistics of the campus itself, this is an overview of, I'll call it Mason Elementary, just so we're staying on the same page and what we're talking about. This is a Google map, and this is one time that Mason City Schools, going down on the record, is faster in front of Google. Okay? So just mark that down on live television. That's right, to all of our Facebook friends out there. We are faster than Google for once. So take a look at this. We have a parking lot right here currently that we built last summer for staff to be ready for that, to make sure we had enough spots. So that's not demonstrated up here. As we look at our map here for option one, and you look at the blue patterns, and you can come up here and take a look at this afterwards. We'll have these maps out here. You can see them up here and take a closer look at this pattern. But on option one, when we bring everybody together, we have our 70, and just to be safe, I put 70 buses into these spots. We think we might be able to do it with 63, but I'm going to put 70 just so we're being thoughtful and nothing surprising. We'd all go along these spots right here. So those are our buses. We would beef up this road that goes around the building. Yes, there is a pathway that goes around the building that we would make safe for a one-way route around the building with some safety features, speed bumps possibly, so we don't make this Indy 500 around the side, because I could see that being a lot of fun. And then we would have third, fourth grade drop-off and pickup right on this side of the building. So third and fourth grade drop-off and pickup. And then you would come through this new thing and out the side. And our buses would be leaving the different directions that they leave today. Because this is similar to what we had today, just less buses. And our fifth, sixth grade would come in and use this similar route with the circle right here. One thing that you may have noticed in the master plan originally, we did have drawn out this extra parking right here in the circle. That's something that we did have a map of already, just in case we needed it. So we're looking at that would be one option. We could add that so that it would be better customer service to our parents, because if you've ever parked at Mason, now it's intermediate, but elementary, you park pretty far away just to pick up your kids, and so we could make this a little bit easier for folks. And then we would also look at an additional parking lot over here for staff, so that we have enough staff parking and for parties and for guests coming into our space. That's option one. Option two has two different maps that we need to look at. The first is the third, fourth grade. You can see that the buses wrap around here, about 40 buses, and that our route stays similar to this year. Remember, 15-minute difference between fifth and sixth grade, and third and fourth. Fifth and sixth grade comes in first, 15 minutes later, third and fourth grade comes in. And then the buses for fifth and sixth grade line up along the side here, about 40 buses or so, and it follows that same route. Big news. People are asking, who's going to be the administrator? Well, Eric Messer is doing a phenomenal job at 5th and 6th grade, and we are very happy, and I want to thank him, and I want to thank Vivian Alvarez, because I asked Vivian Alvarez to step into a role, and she did, and she's an interim principal at 3rd and 4th grade, so she's right back here. Let's give her a hand. Thank you for your service in that. This will be, we'll open this up for interviews and hiring as we go into the spring, and that's a conversation that Vivian and I have had along the way. And with Eric Messer doing such a great job over at 5th and 6th grade and establishing himself there, he has been gracious to be a part of that. And I will tell you this, our administrators this summer, when I came in as a rookie superintendent, one of the first things I had to do was to call Eric, Vivian, Tom, Rob, I mean, all these faces in here, every administrator, and say, hey, can I move you to another building because we're looking at another assignment? Yeah, sure, Jonathan. What do you need? What do you need? And that was a conversation to a T. Everyone was so collaborative. And so when you have a second to thank your administrator, they're great people, and they care about our kids, and they would do anything for our kids. And so that's what I just want to thank them for their willingness to do that, because that was my first conversations as a superintendent, was calling these folks and asking them, I've got a little situation here, can you help me with it? And they were so gracious. So at this point in time, we'll hit pause for a second, we'll take a breather, and what I'd like to invite you to do is to think creatively, and what we're going to ask is here in a moment to have anyone that is interested in having the conversation about elementary. If your kids are there, or maybe you want to split as a family and say, we've got kids in elementary and kids in secondary, no problem. We're going to ask for feedback for the elementary conversation over here. The two questions that we have right away are, do you prefer option 1 or 2? Give a little bit of rationale behind that. And we're going to ask you to talk at your table about that and then share out. And we have facilitators that will gather your thoughts, and they'll record those thoughts for you. And then we have, what concerns do you have for the elementary? What concerns have we maybe not addressed? For example, one quick concern is, well, what if I have, because this is real in our home, I have a 6th grader next year and a 3rd grader. Do I just have to sit in the parking lot for 15 minutes and wait on option 2? No. Well, you could, but no. We actually have thought that through, and Mr. Messer and I were working on some solutions there, and we could have a holding zone so your kids could come down and they could wait for that 15 minutes, and then you could pick both of your kids up at one time for car riders. So we've thought through some solutions, but nowhere close to all the solutions. So that's what we want to get your ideas and your thoughts on. Secondary families, we want you to talk a little bit about, do you prefer option 1 or 2? And you might be thinking, well, why does it matter to me? Because it doesn't affect. Well, financially it does. So there is a financial component. We would love to hear your thoughts on that. And maybe you have some opinions because you've been in that situation already. And then what are the other steps that Mason High School and Mason Middle School should take that would improve our student mental health and help us, not only with sleep, but with all the other issues and things that you've seen out there and things that we've heard up here. We need your help, and we want to open up that conversation about mental health. If there's any other feedback you have on anything you've heard tonight, whether it was with our Hope Squad and our students up here, or it's something that I shared with you that's not clear, I'll be around as well, and we'll be working around the room with our administrators. If you're an administrator here tonight, do you mind standing up really quick so people can just identify you, whether you're central office. Yes, if you're central office or you're a building administrator, just stand up really quick so people can see where you are, who you are. So families, guests, they're all around the room. Feel free to grab any of these folks. If they do not know the answer, they will record your question and they'll get back to me and we'll get that out to you. We have a 2-week window. So if you're watching from Facebook Live right now, we have a 2-week window to give feedback. We would like to make an announcement about our plan the last week of January, so people can begin planning and knowing what the rest of their schedule is going to look like. So, 2-week window, all the feedback you can give us, we're open to it, we want it, we welcome it, and we will have a survey go out. So there will be a survey that goes out after tonight that you can give anonymous feedback. We've shared this with our staff already, so they're starting to gather their feedback. And then if you're here tonight, you will actually, at the very end of the night, you'll get to vote on some of the things that are shared out. So as your table starts to gather some themes, like for example, let's say there's some themes on mental health over here, like I'll give you one, homework, for example. If that comes up over here, and it comes up, and that's one that really like hits home for you, you can take your dots and you can vote on that. So that gives us priority to know that's something we need to take a closer look at. Does that make sense? Okay. I'll be around again. Does that sound okay?
Just feedback on the Post-its.
Feedback on the Post-its.
Post-its will go get posted up.
Post-its to the paper over here. So feedback to Post-its, Post-its to paper. And then our facilitators will find themes out of those, and we'll share back, and we'll have a close-up at the very end.
And just give a nice shout out to our 650 friends who've joined us on Facebook Live.
So if you're on Facebook Live and you couldn't make it here because of all kinds of reasons, thank you so much. We have 650 of you out there waving to you, welcoming you. So you can give your feedback. As soon as this meeting's over, we'll release the feedback form as well. Thank you so much. We'll be around. Elementary conversation here, secondary conversation over here. You can stay at your table if you're already in that zone, and we'll bring you back together at the end.
Hi all, if we could get a last call for your post-it notes, take your good feedback. If you haven't been able to yet, post that up for our secondary folks or our elementary folks. We're going to report out here in just a couple of minutes. So if there's any feedback you've been holding on to, please make sure to get it up there for us. Just some notes on the dots. You each got 6 dots. You can pull all of those and put them on one. You can save it if you are a secondary person and you want to use your dots for secondary. Or you can also use it waiting until you hear from the other side's, like elementary focus, and then you can dot that. We're going to go ahead and let our elementary principals do a report out here in just 3 minutes because our voting started a little early, but that's great. And so we'll let our principals kind of give a report out here in like 5 minutes. go back to your seats and you can dot on your way out. I do want our principals to come on up this way so that they can give us just a little bit of a summary and flavor, particularly for all of our friends on Facebook Live who didn't have a chance to kind of do this exercise with us. We'd love for them to also get a chance to kind of see what families who are here tonight or kind of what's on your heart and mind. So I'm going to start with our secondary principals. If I could ask Associate Principal Shauna Buehler to come on up, as well as Lauren Gentine, our Mason Middle School Principal, and they can share just some of the kind of overarching themes that they were hearing on the secondary side.
So some of the themes that we heard on the secondary side were certainly just some questions in terms of considerations between the two different options. How does that impact their perspectives, different parents' perspectives? We heard some different things just in terms of the finances behind that, and that option one, with the people that I was talking to, seemed to be the better one. We also kind of discussed from a family perspective for families that have siblings that are older that may be caregivers for younger siblings, how that would impact their families. Some other themes that we have up here in the mental health realm, the amount of homework and when homework is meaningful and when it's not meaningful. I had the pleasure at the table that I was at to have a student who would be in that secondary realm kind of talk about her perspective about when homework is meaningful to her and when it is not. And so that was a big topic of discussion from some of the families that I was talking to. Another area is AP courses and the amount of AP courses that students take specifically at the high school, and what that looks like in terms of mental health of our students. Activities in sports, a real concern. If we push back start times 30 minutes, what does that look like in terms of our extracurricular activities for students? Does that mean that they can go earlier? Does that mean that they can then go later? And what is reasonable expectations in that realm? In terms of logistics, a lot of those same points came up. We had an interesting discussion at our table just about technology versus paper. When our students are involved in extracurricular activities, sometimes when they're traveling, there's time that they could be doing some work, and a lot of it is technologically based, and they can't have access to it, so is there an option there? In terms of the amount of access they get to support, just talking about getting in to talk to some different people. And then we have the topic of just homework in general, again. And then there was an interesting one up here just in terms of what is the impact on students that do have after-school jobs, which is something that is a reality for a lot of the students as well. And so those are some of the big topics that came up. We also did have an interesting conversation just about the overall culture in terms of competitiveness and what that looks like in terms of learning and admissions into colleges and those kinds of conversations. So those are some of the big ones. Lauren, did I miss anything, or did you hear any feedback?
I was just going to expound a little bit on the mental health piece. There seems to be a lot of traction around if there's a way for us at the secondary level to create some, for lack of better terms, social consistency so that our kids don't feel like they're starting over socially every year with a brand new set of hundreds of faces, and looking at more counselors and support for those wraparound services, specifically in that mental health category.
Good evening. I am Melissa Bly. I'm the principal at Mason Early Childhood Center, so I'm just going to share some of the concerns and questions that came up from elementary parents. There were some questions, concerns just about before-school childcare, with the before-school time then being longer as a time to get childcare, a question about what that would look like for extended care. So I did share with a couple of families. I don't know that that has been discussed yet, but I do think that would still be just considered part of parents' work schedules, just making sure that we are taking care of kids while parents are at work, if that's an option that they choose to use. The other questions came around just later arrival home on the bus and it being a long day for students, with the younger kids tending to be our population that rises earlier, just looking at that longer day for them and, that being of concern. There was a question about just the differences of kids on the bus if 3 through 6 go together, third graders being different than sixth graders, but they would be on the bus together. And also 3-4 students walking to the 5-6 side was a question that came up, just how to kind of transport kids safely and easily across that building. Just a question too about preparing special needs students for change and just how you prepare kids for transition. And another question about lunchtime occurring soon after arrival. I can only speak from the MEC side, we would definitely take that into consideration so that kids wouldn't be eating right away. And there was a little bit of conversation around homework in the elementary grades. So just how much homework we're giving grades. I would say probably 1 through 4 is where that conversation was mostly focused. And what that looks like, what that should look like, and should we eliminate it was the question that was there. So anything I'm forgetting?
Great job.
Okay.
Great job.
All right.
So as we bring the night to a close, I want to thank a couple people. First of all, I want to thank you for your engagement here, making your time, which is super valuable, available to us to get your feedback. I know that takes a lot, especially during this time of the year, and I want to thank those that are at home that engaged, the 600 plus that are on Facebook. I just got a text from a good friend that's in Washington, D.C. that's watching our live broadcast right now and giving us feedback. I want to thank Todd Petrie and the work he's done with operations, because a lot of the transportation comes through his department and the work that they're doing to help us with logistics. So I want to thank him for the work he's doing. All of our principals for engaging in this, my executive team for helping me think this through. And ICRC is a great partner, and it makes it possible for people to watch this live at home. So those that are working ICRC, I see them on the cameras. I want to thank each of you for your time. And then Tracy Carson puts a lot of details together behind the scenes. Thank you, Tracy, for making this format. I got some feedback about the format, that this is a healthy format for people to give honest feedback and continue. I want to remind everybody that we have a 2-week window for you to give feedback. So if you're like me, you're going to think of something as soon as you walk out the door. And that is totally okay and normal. We want to make that available to, so please give us that feedback. You can go share this with your friends. That's great. The more, the better. The more feedback we can get, the better. And so, again, going back to the core of where this started, never forget that this all came out of our community coming to us and saying, Mason, can you take a step in a direction that would make a healthier environment for our kids, specifically looking at grades 7 through 12 and their mental health and some of the concerns? And we said, we'll do our best. And so this is our attempt right now. And so that's why we're bringing it to you as our public to give us feedback. If you didn't get a chance to say hi to our board members, they love your feedback as well. And we have a couple in the room tonight. So if you have a chance, Charles I know is here, and Connie is here, and I don't know if anybody else is here. So if you have a second to access them, they are board members that you voted in, and they would love to hear your feedback as well. Thank you again for tonight, and we'll be around for a little bit if you have other questions. Thanks.